Hey guys, what's up? This is False Bulls 123 and welcome back to my channel. Okay, story time. Last year I finally got a new job, I get my first big paycheck, and I'm like, ooh, hush bank account, little treat is talking. I want to buy myself a new video game, and I'm not buying some lame-o game that I only kind of want. I want to get one of those critically loved games that everyone was obsessed with a couple years ago, that I just didn't play. So I got Return of the Obra Dinn. So first things first, time is a nightmare. This game came out in 2018 and not like what I thought 2 years ago. And two, this is the third full-length game from developer Lucas Pope, who's known for Papers, Please, another amazing indie darling. So I opened up Return of the Obra Dinn. I'm not like a bona fide games critic, but I think it's safe to say that Obra Dinn is a seminal work of gaming. It's stylish, cleverly designed, and most importantly for a difficult puzzle game, feels fair. It's a game that I feel can accurately be called influential, mostly because I spent the last couple of months playing games influenced by it. I was enamored. I've been in about 4 days, I kept thinking about it, and doing that parasocial thing where you're just kind of re-consuming it by reading like wiki articles and Reddit posts about theories or something, right? You get fandom. So I type in games like Obra Dinn into Google, find a Reddit post. I'm looking for any games with similar magic to this masterpiece. I tried a few other games that I loved, namely Case of the Golden Idol, The Root Trees Are Dead, and Chants of Sennaar, my favorite of the bunch after Obra Dinn. I also tried a few more, but wasn't really enjoying them due to too much focus on open-world exploration than the mystery-solving aspect, namely Heaven's Gate and Outer Wilds. Okay, so I look at this. I'd already played Chants of Sennaar, and I didn't feel like shelling out for the last 2 games just yet because they were a little pricey. So that leaves The Root Trees Are Dead, a free itch.io game about forensic genealogy using retro 90s tech. And, yeah, that's like my entire shit. So I clicked on the web page, loaded the game. I'm going to play something? Well, not the best guitar player, but okay. It probably needs to be tuned. No. How about a traditional ballad? I think it'd be right up your street. And spent the next 10 hours having it rewire my entire brain chemistry. It was sometime around then that I discovered a subreddit titled r/MetroidBrania. What the fuck is that? If you're hippin' with it, you've probably caught on to the fact that Metroidbrania is a pun on the words brain, i.e. puzzle games, and Metroidvania. But if you're not like me, who spent most of his adolescence playing niche indie flash games instead of going to parties, then it begs the question, what the fuck is a Metroidvania?
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In 1987, there were 2 games released on the NES, Metroid and Castlevania II Simon's Quest. Other platformer games like Mario, Pitfall, or even the original Castlevania utilized side-scrolling level-based gameplay. However, Metroid and Simon's Quest featured an open-world game map that the player could explore freely. Metroidvania games are games based on the mechanical structure of games like these. Let's abstract for a moment. Imagine a maze, right? any maze, and your job is to get from the beginning to the end. Now imagine that you want to make this maze as difficult as possible. One way to do that would be to add gates and keys to the maze. At different spots you could hide a key where the player could get to it, and so as the player traverses the maze, not only does the maze itself change, but the player's understanding of the maze. This is the premise of the level design of a MetroidVania game, an open-world maze which changes as the player progresses. However, instead of keys and doors, the game instead gatekeeps progress for some form of upgrade, typically things like mobility upgrades like double jumping or wall climbing, or through fighting upgrades such as the ability to block or attack from a distance. So a gate in a MetroidVania might be a level design with a tall wall, or a difficult enemy that can block basic attacks. This creates a gameplay loop that encourages exploration. You start out with limited options and gain new tech that changes the way you can approach or move through the game, and this in turn allows you to explore further and repeat the process. So we can understand that a Metroidvania's key features are 1. Platforming, 2. Open world level design, 3. A gameplay loop that focuses on exploration, 4. Backtracking, and 5. Recontextualization, i.e. seeing the previous levels in a new light. So let's talk about MetroidBranias. So we can imagine that game progression in a Metroidvania, which I'm going to shorten to MV going forward, is gatekept by mechanical tech. So the gate is represented by some kind of obstacle that I need some kind of ability or tool to surmount. So we can understand that MetroidBranias, MB for short, would have the gates be a kind of puzzle, and the key would be the knowledge to solve that puzzle. That's a little esoteric sounding, so let me give you an example. Let's talk about Fez. Fez is a 2012 puzzle platformer where you play as a little bean guy with a silly hat that deals with the horrific implications of a third dimension. So our little bean guy, Gomez, stumbles across an eldritch being known as the Hyperhydron, who talks to him in a weird language, gives him a hat, and then very rudely just explodes. And now his job is to collect the various cubes of this dead god with the help of horrific space-bending powers, because Gomez is a 2D creature in a 3D world. In Games About Being Lost, a video essay about this genre, Adam Millard says something very prescient.
Reveal themselves. Upon actually stepping into Hotel Leicester's jar, you are confronted with a barrage of obstacles that not only are you going to be utterly incapable of solving, but that you probably aren't even able to recognize as puzzles at all, ending up with you feeling completely and utterly lost.
What is a puzzle? Is this a puzzle? How about this? What about this? How do you even begin to know how to solve this? What even is this? This is an MB gate. To solve this in Fez, you have to explore the world until you stumble upon something that helps you understand it. Once this makes sense to you, it's easy. You can solve these very easily no matter where you come across them. Mechanically, Metroidvanias treat knowledge as tech. The same way an MV character acquires cool guns and mobility aids, so does the MB player gain ways of seeing within the game. Each new discovery recontextualizes the game world at large. This is, at time of writing, the original definition of Metroidvania, and as a way of describing the concept to newcomers, I think it's serviceable. Though if you are once again hip and with it, you might know that some people really don't like the name. Some people might find it kitschy or cringe or just hate puns, I guess. However, for me personally, I dislike it because it implies a level of mechanical specificity that is not found in the games being called Metroidbrania. If we look at the initial sample from the Reddit post, none of these games match up with the mechanics established. Chance of Sonar and Case of the Golden Idol are strictly level-based, and Root Trees and Oberdeen don't have any form of mechanical gatekeeping in the work. They are sandbox deductive puzzles. Heaven's Vault and Outer Wilds feature exploration, but lack any real form of puzzle gates. And all 6 of these games are not platformers, which MVs, with notable exceptions, very much are. The problem compounds when we begin to explore the fandom around these games and try to find games similar to these touchstones. The more games I play that are touted as MB or MB-like, the more confusing that classification gets. So that's what this video is about. Can we create a proper definition for Metroidbrania, and how can we determine whether or not a game is a MB or not? What is the criteria? Let's start digging deeper. There's a through line within r/MB where there's a hidden rule about the mechanics, and that is that pure MetroidBranias can be beaten from the start as the user has all the necessary information possible, and I don't like this rule. I think it's reductive and confusing and a really weird hill to gatekeep on, and to explain why, I want to talk about the mechanics of Oberdin. It's mentioned by name in the r/MB description, and while this might be editorializing, definitely feels like a gateway game into the genre. It's going to be my meter stick going forward. Because I basically want to be H-Bomber guy and or wear his skin as a suit, let's take a page out of his game reviews and talk about the first 5 minutes of Oberdin. You start out with a title card explaining that Oberdin is a ship. The manifest listed 60 people on it and that all of them are missing. Your job as an insurance investigator is to find out what happened to all 60 passengers and their fate. You're also given a package from a mysterious benefactor with 2 items. A mostly blank ledger filled with notes and helpful information about the ship, and an odd pocket watch. As you climb aboard the ship, you only have access to the top deck, and the main point of interest is the literal rotting corpse in front of the captain's cabin. Well, I don't know about you, but I'd probably start there. The pocket watch begins rattling, and as you click the prompted button, you are surrounded by a flurry of particles, and you hear this.
Open the door! Let me break it down and take more than those shells! You what can I give you?
Suddenly, you are in a snapshot of this man's moment of death. You have a few moments to explore the scene and try to orient yourself, and as you leave the scene, the ledger fills in the location, the transcript of any spoken dialogue, and any other person present. You usually can tell how the person died, but who they are and who or what killed them is often a bigger mystery. Finding these bodies is the easy part. Solving the mystery is what's hard. And as you find more and more of these scenes, you are slowly allowed to investigate the rest of the ship. And that's what's really important for this discussion, is that you don't have to solve a single one of these deaths to finish the game. You can explore the ship, watch everyone die, and simply leave with a completely blank ledger. You can fail at your job, refuse to solve the mystery, and still sit through the credits. The real gameplay is completely separate from the game itself. I would be playing the game, and the footage would look like this. Because Oberdin is a lot less like a traditionally structured game, and more like a traditional puzzle experience, something like Kane's Jawbone, where you have to make your own assumptions and take notes and figure stuff out on paper. Oberdin has a kind of sandbox effect. I would go into a game session with the goal of identifying the captain's stewards or the topmen. The gameplay is the puzzle, and the puzzle is the gameplay. With that in mind, someone saying that Oberdin would be a pure game for knowing the answers is reductive to me. Solving the puzzle is the game, is tautological. If you've beaten the game, you know how to beat the game. And also, what does that look like mechanically? I simply memorize all quick math, 180 unique answers to this game and put them all in at once. Why would I do that? What satisfaction would that give me? And the replay on this game is negligible because I've already beaten the puzzle. I can't regain that sense of first discovery. But let's take this idea in good faith, because there are definitely games that fit this description. Meet Grun. It's a 2024 indie game that's one half cozy gardening sim in the Dutch countryside and one half fantasy horror point-and-click adventure. Spoilers! What's interesting about this game is that unlike other MB, I'm not solving traditional puzzles per se. I'm learning more about the world, its hidden mechanics, and also more efficient ways to complete objectives in the game. It reminds me of two things: roguelikes and escape room flash games. Let me explain. Okay, first, what is a roguelike? Basically, in the 1980s, there was a procedurally generated dungeon crawler RPG game called Rogue. People copied the format, and those derivative games were called roguelikes. Here's where it gets interesting. Rogue is distinctive because it features permadeath. When your character dies, the game ends, meaning that each run of the game is a unique and complete gaming experience. However, this is kind of a downer, right? A game that you have to start over from the beginning every time you die? Gross. So what some developers have done is make permadeath a feature, but not the core mechanic. Enter in roguelites. Think Binding of Isaac. When Isaac gets murdered by his religious trauma, he dies, the dungeon resets, so on and so forth. But as you play the game, you unlock more and more items to fill that dungeon with, as well as other builds that might be easier for certain playstyles. That means there's a distinct gameplay loop that's iterative. You'll progress through the game the more you play it. So already we're getting somewhere. If Grun uses this kind of roguelike cycle, perhaps it's not a MetroidBrania per se, but a Brainlight. I don't know, title in progress. The other thing about the game is that it reminds me of the Don't Escape series. Okay, story time. The year is 2013 and Script Builder Studio releases Don't Escape, a reverse escape room game. Let's focus on Don't Escape 2 since it has the clearest mechanics for this discussion. In DS2, you are a survivor of the zombie apocalypse and must barricade a bunker to protect yourself from the oncoming horde that will be there by nightfall. That means you only have 8 hours to protect yourself and find whatever supplies you can survive the night with. What complicates things is the time management system. Traveling and doing specific actions eats up the amount of time you have left, so it makes you have to make tough decisions on what you actually have time for. You can get a lot done if you know how to do it quicker. To get the good ending of the game, you often have to find shortcuts and alternate ways of completing objectives. Let's explore this concept more with Grun. If you want to get to the rest of the town in the first playthrough of Grun, you have to do the following. This is the intended solution. 1. Exit the bus. 2. Find the key to the gate. 3. Unlock the gate and enter the garden. 4. Enter the shed and pick up the garden shears. 5. Complete the garden to 30% to trigger the magpie. 6. Learn about the rotten board for the diary entry. 7. Break down said board to get to the backyard. 8. Find the cemetery gate key. 9. Unlock access to the church grounds. 10. Find the red knob. 11. Traverse the liminal church maze. 12. Exit through the shortcut door. However, there is an easier solution. You can cut a hole through the hedge in the backyard. I found out about this when I was literally running with scissors and triggered it by mistake. So, when people say that a true Metroidbrania can be solved in the beginning, I once again imagine the Metroidvania analog. That this perfect run where we already know how to do everything is equivalent to some kind of final boss in a more traditional video game. It is using a different style of mechanic, but still relying on me gaining knowledge as a form of game empowerment. What this outside of definition is missing is the many hours of exploration, learning, and mastering the mechanics of this game that leads to these final perfect runs. I think it's important that we make this mechanical distinction because both of these game types are utilizing the same core themes. Exploration, experimentation, knowledge-based progression, but for an underlying mechanical difference, which means that beating Grun and beating something like The Witness is going to look very different. It's an importance in kind. The other useful aspect is that we can easily slot games like The Outer Wilds into our MB categories now, and begin to ask if other iterative loop games like the Don't Escape or Kindergarten series deserve a place in this genre. The boundaries of ignorance. So, a lot of times when you're writing an essay, you get to a roadblock where it's very difficult for you to formulate your thoughts and meanings. The question I kept bumping up against in this essay is, what separates a Metroidbrania from every other kind of game? Because you ultimately have two answers. 1, mechanics, and 2, narrative or design themes. If you choose mechanics, then only a very select number of games fit into the categorization, and the entire community around that needs to split up. Mechanically, Obra Dinn is not a Metroidbrania game. And I want to be clear here that it's really important that we recognize that a Metroidbrania is not going to be defined through any singular mechanic, even knowledge tech. As I was writing this essay, I thought for a moment about the game Celeste, a 2018 platformer by Maddie Makes Games that I've spent way too many hours playing. If you're curious, I have beaten Farewell, I have not gotten the Moonberry or 1A Dashless, and I'm stuck in Strawberry Jam Expert because I don't understand neutral jumping. In the community, there's a concept known as movement tech, which are the various ways that you can move the character, utilizing the mechanics to your benefit. I'm not going to explain how they work, but suffice to say that they're mostly optional mechanics you learn to be challenge or fan-made levels. The thing is that these are less traditional mechanics that are gate-kept of your progression, and more so, knowledge tech. If you learn to do a wall bounce or a hyper dash, you can apply that almost immediately to the game. By our current definitions of knowledge tech, movement tech in Celeste works the same way. I think it's also important to point out that a lot of this tech was popularized by the Celeste speedrunning community, and a lot of these techs are speedrunning tactics that got co-opted by the greater level making community. So logically, if this knowledge tech was created by speedrunners, then ultimately you can have game mechanics that exist outside the intended base game. Another important example for me against the mechanics argument is jigsaw puzzles. When I was trying to create an explanation for the more esoteric kinds of MetroidBrania games, I was playing around a lot with this idea of a blank room. You have all the pieces to put the puzzle together, you just have to fill it out. That's how Oberdin works. You know there's 60 people on board, you have the names, their ethnicities, their occupations. All you have to do is match the names with the faces. So I'm trying to explain this to myself, and it's winter, and it's snowing, and my boss calls me and says, "Yay, it's a snow day, go fuck off and enjoy yourself." And then I proceed to spend 3.5 hours putting together a jigsaw puzzle with my aunt. And I realize that the jigsaw puzzle is a MetroidBrania. Hear me out. When you do a jigsaw puzzle, you start with the border. You set the boundary of ignorance. We know that every other piece has to fit inside that box. Then you normally try to solve a smaller bit of it, and as you do that, the puzzle recontextualizes. You realize that the squiggles are actually from two different parts of the puzzle, or that you've been assuming there was an extra row of pieces and that this part actually fits together. You also begin to literally see the big picture. Near the end, you're solving for a process of elimination using the power of deduction to limit your possibilities. When we were about 80% of the way through, I began organizing the pieces by shape so that we could brute force hack our ways for replacement if necessary. I was using the shape of the world to glean information. The same way I might use the structure of a MetroidBrania to learn more. I'll give you an example here. I recently played the game Type Help, which requires you to type out file names listing the location and number of people there. Now the file only pops up if every person in the scene is listed. So if you know that Martha is heading to the kitchen and you type that in, and the file isn't found, then we know Martha isn't in the kitchen alone. You can also set nicknames for the characters using the index numbers, but the game only allows you to set 12 names, meaning that mechanically, there are only 12 characters in the house. That's the boundary of ignorance. You can't put the last puzzle piece outside of the border. That's not how the game is constructed. So here's the issue, obviously. A jigsaw puzzle is not a Metroidbrania, but it uses a lot of the same progression as those games. If we're going to be emotionally honest, that just means that these ideas around Metroidbranias apply to a greater world of puzzle making in general. When I'm looking at work like Oberdin or Type Help, I'm seeing a video game, but there's a hidden, more traditional logic puzzle underneath. So in XKCD 927 fashion, we have not only not figured out what the fuck a tree is, there might be several interconnecting ideas of Metroidbrania here. So let's add one more layer to it and talk about game progression. In some games like Metroidvanias, as you progress, your character becomes stronger. Their stats go up, they hit harder, they have more health, and ultimately that creates a pleasurable feeling of empowerment. The player feels like the character is more powerful than they were before, but mechanically, progression isn't the only way to create that feeling. A game could simply get harder and the player's satisfaction is through beating that challenge. Narrative can also be a reward. A player can feel like she understands the world better, or the characters deeper, or that they have solved a mystery. In this case, Metroidbranias rely on satisfaction for solving puzzles, yes, but ultimately in service to a greater understanding of the game. The progression is from ignorance to understanding. The satisfaction is the game making sense that you are in control of the chaos. So let's try to properly define it. Metroidbranias are a style of game that utilizes a progression from ignorance to knowledge. It separates itself from other puzzle games by having these puzzles contribute either mechanically or narratively to a greater understanding or mastery of the world, instead of them being arbitrary. Metroidbranias can be linear, but are often not, and oftentimes encourage the players to experiment or try new things. Metroidbranias often require the players to discover the mechanics as part of the gameplay and puzzle solving, and Metroidbrania's satisfaction or empowerment is often cerebral. The enjoyment of playing these games comes from solving a greater mystery or achieving an understanding of the game, as opposed to satisfaction from mechanical, skill-based gameplay. Adam Millar began his essay on the topic with a question. When was the last time you felt truly lost? And he ends by coining a new term for the genre, discovery games, which I kind of hate as a name. Millard rails against the usage of terms like adventure game, for instance, due to its ambiguity, but his own term is equally ambiguous. In the same way that most games feature a sense of adventure, most games are about discovering things. I do, however, agree with his centralized premise that these games are not mechanically congruent, but rather have thematic consistency. Millard represents this as a dichotomy between being lost and found. I, however, am going to frame it between ignorance and knowledge. I am going to call these games ignorance games. This, however, is half the battle. Part of the problem of defining this genre is that these games span a number of mechanics and subgenres, everything from walking sims to Sakabon. So to help define this genre, I'm proposing a few categories. These are not exhaustive, but will account for most of the games I've played or seen mentioned. Category 1. Pure MetroidBranias. Examples include games like Fez and Tunic. Basically, your classic idea of the Metroidbrania. What is important about this genre is its open-world level design, knowledge tech, and gate as key mechanics. It's also important to note that these games do not have to be platformers. This is the category I would use to describe games like The Witness and Void Stranger. Brain-likes. Examples are Grun and Outer Wilds. These are games that use knowledge learning across multiple iterative loops. It's also important to point out that these tend to have some kind of time mechanic, either through static real-time events like our mentioned examples, or through a kind of temporal action economy, like in the previously mentioned Kindergarten and Don't Escape series. Deduction games. Examples are Oberdin and The Root Trees Are Dead. These are games that utilize deductive logic to solve a puzzle. There are two common styles that I'm going to call Oberdin-likes and Golden Idol-likes. Oberdin-likes are large deductive puzzles that one ultimately solves through context clues and the process of elimination. Examples would include games like Root Trees and Classified at 2015. Golden Idol-likes are level-based deductive puzzles that seek to disambiguate a complex scene. Examples would include things like Senna in the Forest, Chance of Sonara, and Land Party 97. Note, I am separating these games less on specific structures like Golden Idol's word bank mechanic, and more on how these puzzles are presented. Does this puzzle feel like a blank canvas that you need to fill in, or does it feel like a tangle of strings that you need to untangle? Ultimately, this might be a meaningless distinction or merely an aesthetic one. Both of these games are influential, so time and analysis will have to decide whether there's a distinct difference between their playstyles and the games they influence. There are also micro-categories. The two that stand out are archival games, games that involve using archives. Examples would be A Hand with Many Fingers and Night at the Archive, and translation games, games involving translating a language. So games like Chance of Sonar, Heaven's Gate, and Epigraph. I would like to take a moment to thank the Root Trees Are Dead Discord for their collating of many of these games, and for backlogged user Diet Coke Stan in particular for their amazing list of deduce them ups. It is important to note that, like the other parent genres, not all deduction puzzle games are automatically MBs. Non-linear narrative games. Examples would include the works of Sam Barrow and the walking sims of the Fulbright Company. I want to be clear that this does not include every single walking sim and narrative game in existence. For example, Dear Esther's narrative is ephemeral, vague, and up to interpretation, but the way that story is told is very linear, whereas something like the narrative in her story is very literal, but is told in a fragmented way. It is in essence a narrative sandbox that the player traverses in their own way. Like all other MBs, the important aspect of these games is the recontextualization. Your understanding and relationship to the story should change over the course of the telling. Okay. I suck at recording things apparently, so there we go. Anyway, my name is FalseBulls123. You've been watching this YouTube video for half an hour now. This is kind of just coming back at the end of it, kind of discussing things. You get it. When I first started this essay, I wrote in my closing thoughts, I wrote this essay 6 months ago. Or I started this essay 6 months ago. I said that about a year ago. It's been about a year and a half of getting this into fruition. Not because it actually took that much time, just because I'm lazy and I'm busy. And I don't prioritize my YouTube channel enough, I guess. The point that I'm trying to get at here is that when I first started this essay, we were talking about kind of like the main games in it, right? We were talking Oberdin, we were talking Root Trees, and Golden Idol had just come out and people were like playing it. Now we've had a few different kind of like big fun, like big popular games in the, I guess, like MetroidBrania space. It's a term that people are trying to advertise as now. It's interesting. So the puzzle market, or I guess like sort of the puzzle community maybe, is definitely starting to become familiar with the term and starting to kind of like think about these things. So like I said in this essay, it is very possible that time will tell how accurate some of these ideas I'm pushing out actually are. The reason why I made this video, the reason why I mentioned all of these different places that I was getting these game recommendations from, is that I made this in response to this community, in response to, like, you know, this game genre that was kind of being not developed, but in a very real sense codified. And so, if you disagree with my thoughts here, if you have your own ideas about Metroidbrania, I would love to hear them. Two things I don't think I touched on enough, I didn't clarify enough in my essay, was one, I don't think I really touched on the recontextualization enough. The idea that, like, you know, playing a Metroidbrania, you have these moments where you kind of, like, see the world in a new light. The Metroidbrania subreddit occasionally uses the terms epiphany moment. That might be a specific person on there. If you did coin that term, let me know. I don't want to, like, you know, steal that from you. But basically, yeah, epiphany moment, right? Having these moments where you're like, oh, aha, eureka, like, you suddenly get it, right? It clicks into place. I feel like that is a really big element of Metroidbranias in a lot of ways. The other thing I didn't really clarify was the puzzle as key mechanic. I mentioned it during the taxonomy, and I don't explain that well. That's a bit of an artifact from an older draft. Basically, the puzzle is gate, so it's contrasting the puzzle as gate mechanic, right? So gates and keys, we talked about that in the essay. The puzzle as gate is basically you have a gate and you have to solve like a random puzzle, right? And the puzzle doesn't really matter. It's just some kind of obstacle to get you through the gate, right? The puzzle as key is the Metroidbrania puzzle, right? You learn how to solve that puzzle, and then you can use that puzzle as a key. Hopefully that makes sense. Pretty much that's all I wanted to talk about. I'm trying to keep this short because I don't feel like editing. So, thanks for watching, and hopefully you will see more from me this year. Maybe, maybe not. I have some life stuff going on, and I'm just trying to kind of deal with that right now. This is a hobby for me, darlings. So, goodbye and good night, I guess.